Hello, my name is Kris Williamson, and my presentation is entitled Institutional Sexism and Malaysia's Response to COVID-19. So I'll start by saying that Malaysia has actually handled the COVID-19 crisis comparatively well. Now, this is partly due to the strict lockdown that was initiated back in March. While this did create a number of socioeconomic problems, it also likely saved many lives. One of the problems, though, that it did create was accusations of sexism by the Ministry of Women, Family and Community Development, ironically, right? So with sexism, just so that we're on the same page here, sexism, as I'm going to define it for this presentation, is institutional or ideological system that prescribes division by gender, differentiates the social roles attributed to women and men, and ranks them in a hierarchy, with, of course, men being placed above women in this hierarchy. So it's not just the women's ministry that was guilty of this, using sexist rhetoric when offering public information campaigns to the public in ways to sort of help them to deal with the COVID-19 crisis. There was several agencies, but for the sake of this presentation and indeed the essay, I'm looking at a series of nicknamed Happy Household Public Information Campaign digital posters that the Women's Development Ministry released to help women deal with the fact that during lockdown they were going to be living with their spouses 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that might cause problems because it wasn't something that either partner was used to. So I've divided this into two separate questions to approach the research here. The first is, how does the government rhetorically reinforce inequities for women through these public information campaign posters? And the second is, what implications does the institutionalization of sexism during a time of crisis have for Malaysian society? So my approach is to employ critical discourse analysis, as this will help to situate the way that these texts are both generated and also ideologically shaped by power relations. So with sexism, and indeed with any ism, we're looking at power relations and the imbalance there. The other important point to consider, of course, in my approach is language, because language actually is really important to reveal inherent values and also conceptualizations of reality. So while I don't believe that the Women's Development Ministry intended to harm women through releasing these posters, the sexist rhetoric does indeed do just that. So I want to show you some of these posters, and I can just give you a glimpse here. I won't translate them, but just give you a brief summary here. The first one is essentially suggesting that women must perform high levels of femininity strictly for their husband's benefit, that they must look presentable all the time while they're at home. The next one here, this is suggesting that if you ask your husband to share responsibility with the housework and he doesn't do it the way you want, then you should essentially subvert yourself and act in a very cutesy sort of way, mimicking the voice of Doraemon, which is an animated blue earless Japanese robotic cat. And you should mimic his voice when asking your husband to do things in a different way, because apparently the Women's Ministry doesn't believe that you should just be able to tell him to do it differently. That would imply some sort of equality. The final one I want to consider just for this presentation here is when tensions do rise, the ministry suggests that you can count to 20, but this is also implying that women are overly emotional, unable to control themselves, and perhaps acting irrationally in conflicts with their husband. So while this is all very clearly problematic, and that's just scratching the surface of some of the problems in these and other posters that were issued, there's just a number of issues that I would bring up here and suggest it's more than just simply economic concerns. When we talk about sexism, the majority of the research is really considering that women don't earn as much money as men do, that they're oftentimes passed up for promotions that would otherwise go to men, or higher positions are given to men instead of women. But it's really much more than just economics. There's the health concerns involved with this sort of rhetoric. Now, if sexism has been normalized in society and indeed institutionalized, this is going to create a constant atmosphere where women are essentially always under this form of discrimination. So in addition to economic concerns, the health concerns are very many. We have cardiovascular and immune system issues, a reduction in cognitive functioning, greater levels of anxiety, anger, depression, body shame, diminished self-esteem, and all of these could lead to substance abuse eventually, which, I mean, it just sort of spirals out of control if these aren't actually dealt with and called out, which is why it was really interesting to see primarily Malaysian women on social media calling out the Women's Development Ministry for this sexist rhetoric. And in the end, of course, we are in the middle of a global pandemic. So while the ministry was probably had best intentions to offer women their advice, the sexist rhetoric did end up being harmful. But I will say to the ministry's credit that they did remove these posters immediately when they saw the negative reaction that was all over social media. So I'm going to end my presentation here. Thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy reading the essay.